Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory, December 15, 1835. Frost coated the interior walls of Jonas Fletcher's cabin, despite the fire burning steadily in the stone hearth. Ice crystals formed on the oiled paper windows, and the temperature inside had dropped to 12 degrees Fahrenheit by dawn. Most trappers in the valley relied on single-wall construction, logs 6 to 8 inches thick, clay chinking, and simple paper or rawhide coverings over window openings. Fletcher's cabin used double-layered walls with 3 feet of sawdust insulation between them and wooden shutters hinged to seal the windows each night. The contrast would soon prove decisive. Fletcher burned 9 cords of wood that winter. His neighbor, using standard construction, burned 24 cords and still woke to frost on his bedding. The mathematics of insulation and fuel consumption would determine who stayed in the valley and who left come spring. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory, November 1834. Jonas Fletcher stood in the doorway of his newly completed cabin, watching the first significant snowfall of the season blanket the valley floor. Born in Virginia in 1809, Fletcher had worked as a carpenter's apprentice before joining a trapping brigade heading west in 1833. He possessed building skills that exceeded most trappers' abilities, but his knowledge centered on timber frame construction suitable for milder eastern climates. The cabin Fletcher built that autumn followed standard frontier practice. He selected a site with southern exposure near a cold spring where cottonwood and elm provided adequate timber. Construction took 3 weeks. He felled logs in late August when sap still ran through the wood, stacked them with bark intact using saddle-notch corners, and chinked the gaps with clay pulled from the creek bank mixed with prairie grass and moss. The stone fireplace sat against the north wall where the ground was flattest for the foundation. A single window, covered with oiled paper, faced south. Fletcher considered the work adequate. Every trapper in the Rocky Mountains built similarly. Speed mattered more than refinement. The sooner a man completed his shelter, the sooner he could focus on trapping beaver. The first hard freeze arrived November 12th. Nighttime temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Fletcher woke to find frost creeping across the interior walls despite maintaining the fire through the night. His breath formed visible clouds inside the cabin. The water bucket placed 3 feet from the fireplace had frozen solid. By December, Fletcher was burning 4 cords of wood monthly, 3 times what he had calculated as necessary. The unseasoned logs had begun to shrink as moisture left the wood, opening gaps between them that no amount of additional chinking could permanently seal. The bark held moisture against the wood, encouraging rot and providing habitat for insects. The clay chinking cracked during temperature swings, then crumbled away. Moss dried out and fell from the gaps in chunks. The fireplace location proved disastrous. Positioned against the exterior north wall, half its warmth radiated directly to the outside. The stone mass, which should have stored and slowly released heat, instead conducted thermal energy straight through the wall into the freezing air beyond. Fletcher kept detailed records in a small ledger. December 3rd. Burned 2 loads of wood. Cabin remains cold. Hands too stiff to work, hides properly. December 9th. 3 cords used this month already. Cannot understand the loss. December 17th. Frost on interior walls despite fire. Sleep impossible without every blanket. The mathematics were brutal and simple. At 4 cords per month, Fletcher's winter would consume 24 cords. Cutting and hauling 1 cord required a full day of dangerous, exhausting labor. 24 days of work instead of trapping, maintaining equipment, or hunting for meat. By February 1835, Fletcher had exhausted his initial wood supply and was cutting fresh timber in sub-zero temperatures. His hands bore permanent scars from axe work in the cold. His back ached constantly from hauling logs through snow. The cabin had become not shelter, but a thermal liability that consumed resources faster than he could replace them. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. February 18, 35. Fletcher sat hunched near the hearth, watching the flame flicker weakly against the stone. Despite the fire roaring at the center of the room, he had moved the burning logs away from the wall in a desperate attempt to retain more heat. His breath remained visible in the freezing air. The temperature inside hovered around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. His ledger recorded the grim accounting. 22 cords consumed between November and February. 73 days spent cutting and hauling wood instead of working trap lines. Fur production down 30% compared to the previous season when he had shared a better-built cabin with another trapper. Fletcher understood something fundamental had failed in his design, but he could not identify the specific problems. The logs appeared tight. The fireplace drew properly. The roof kept out snow. Yet cold penetrated the structure as though the walls were made of paper rather than 12-inch logs. Other trappers in the valley struggled similarly. William Crawford, whose claim adjoined Fletcher's to the south, reported burning similar quantities of wood. Samuel Morrison, 5 miles north, had abandoned his cabin entirely and moved into a shared structure with 2 other men, pooling resources to maintain adequate heat. The standard cabin design that worked reasonably well in lower elevations and milder climates became nearly unlivable in the extreme temperature swings of high-altitude country. Summer days reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Winter nights dropped to 30 below. The same structure had to handle a temperature range of 120 degrees. Fletcher's carpentry experience told him that buildings could be designed to manage thermal conditions. His father's workshop in Virginia had featured double walls with sawdust insulation. The brick houses of wealthy merchants in Richmond used thick masonry walls that moderated interior temperatures year-round. But translating those principles to frontier log construction with limited tools and materials exceeded his current understanding. By March, Fletcher made a decision. He would remain in the valley, continue trapping, and rebuild properly before the next winter. The cost of reconstruction, time, materials, labor, would be substantial. But the alternative was another winter of misery or abandoning his claim. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Fall 1835. Niels Bergstrom arrived at Fletcher's cabin on an October afternoon, leading a pack mule loaded with beaver pelts. Bergstrom, a Swedish immigrant who had worked the Rocky Mountains since the early 1820s, was one of the old-timers who had witnessed everything and survived through knowledge rather than luck. Bergstrom examined Fletcher's cabin with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly what he was observing. He pushed on logs, checked the chinking, studied the fireplace position. Finally he said, "Your cabin is built backwards." Fletcher asked what that meant. Bergstrom explained in the straightforward manner of someone who had learned these principles through hard experience. Heat moved in specific ways. It radiated from hot surfaces. It conducted through materials, faster through some than others. It rose, which was why ceiling areas stayed warmer than floors. Fletcher's cabin fought against all 3 heat movements. The fireplace radiated half its warmth to the exterior wall, which conducted that heat straight outside. Rising heat escaped through gaps near the roofline that Fletcher had not sealed adequately. The log walls, which seemed solid, actually acted as moderate conductors, not terrible insulators but far from efficient. And the cabin had no thermal mass inside the insulated envelope to hold warmth after the fire died down. Bergstrom described techniques he had seen used by trappers who had learned from mistakes, fireplaces positioned in the interior or at least built with significant mass extending into the living space. Double wall construction in the coldest areas, 2 layers of logs with packed earth or moss between them for insulation. Proper chinking using materials that would not crack or fall away. Building with seasoned logs that would not shrink and open new gaps. That same autumn, a Shoshone woman named Morning Crow came through the valley with her husband, a French-Canadian trapper named Baptiste Marot. They stopped at Fletcher's cabin to trade. Morning Crow studied the Aida structure and said, in the mixture of Shoshone, French, and English that served as common language in the mountain trade, "White men build cold houses. You make walls that breathe out warmth." She explained that her people used what she called two skins when building structures meant to last through winter, an inner wall and an outer wall with air or insulating material trapped between them. The principle was simple. Air itself provided reasonable insulation as long as it did not move. Trap air between two barriers and it could not carry heat away, but with a single log wall, air on both sides contacted the wood directly, allowing constant heat transfer. Morning Crow described additional principles. Structures could be designed to work with seasons, staying warm in winter and cool in summer, if builders understood how sun moved and how air flowed. In summer, she said, openings high on walls allowed hot air to leave. In winter, those openings stayed closed, keeping hot air inside. Fletcher spent the rest of autumn and early winter thinking about everything Bergstrom and Morning Crow had told him. He thought about heat moving in different ways, about trapping air, about positioning the fireplace where its warmth would stay inside instead of escaping. He thought about double walls and proper materials. And he thought about his own carpentry background, which gave him skills most trappers lacked. By December, Fletcher had worked out a plan for a new cabin. He would rebuild from scratch, using everything he had learned. Construction would take most of the following summer, but it would be worth having a structure that actually worked with the mountain climate instead of fighting it. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Fall 1835 through spring 1836. Fletcher started cutting logs in late November when sap had retreated and wood would season better. He cut twice as many logs as needed for a standard cabin because his design called for double walls in critical areas. He let the logs sit through winter, stacked with spacers between them to allow air circulation. Each log was stripped of bark immediately after cutting. Bark created irregular surfaces, held moisture, and provided homes for insects. Stripped logs, shaped to consistent diameter, could be fitted together with minimal gaps. The process was backbreaking. Each log required hours of work with a draw knife. But Fletcher understood that gaps created thermal losses. By spring, when most moisture had left the wood, Fletcher began construction. The first major change was foundation and floor. His original cabin had sat directly on ground with a packed earth floor. The new design incorporated stone foundation piers at corners and midpoints, raising the entire structure about 2 feet off ground. This created a crawl space that served multiple purposes. It kept bottom logs from ground moisture and rot. It provided a buffer of air between cold earth and living space. It allowed storage for items that needed to stay cool in summer but protected from deep freezing in winter. The floor itself was made from split logs, puncheons laid flat side up over thick support beams. This created an actual wood floor, much warmer underfoot than packed earth, and provided better insulation from cold below. The air gap in the crawl space combined with mass of the wood floor created a thermal buffer that kept the living area noticeably warmer. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Spring through summer 1836. The walls represented Fletcher's most significant departure from standard construction. He built the main structure with large, carefully fitted logs, each one debarked and hewn flat on top and bottom where they contacted each other. This was more work than using round logs, but it created much tighter joints with fewer gaps to seal. For the north and west walls, sides facing prevailing winter winds, Fletcher built a second wall 2 feet inside the main wall. This inner wall used smaller logs, also hewn flat. The 2-foot gap between walls was filled with layers of materials, dried moss at the bottom, then thick layers of dry leaves and forest duff, then more moss, then a final layer of clay mixed with grass. The concept was creating multiple layers of trapped air and insulating material. Each layer interrupted heat transfer. The combination reduced conduction dramatically compared to single-wall construction. The east and south walls did not receive full double-wall treatment because they faced winter sun and less severe weather. But Fletcher chinked these walls much more carefully than his first cabin, using a specific recipe he had developed. The base layer was small split wood pieces wedged tightly into gaps. Over this went a mixture of clay, sand, and cow hair. He traded for a bag of hair trimmings from a settler's ranch down valley. The hair reinforced the clay, preventing cracks. The sand added structure. The clay provided the seal. But Fletcher added one more element to his chinking recipe: lime. He had learned from another trapper that mixing a small amount of lime into clay chinking made it more resistant to water damage and cracking. The lime created a chemical reaction that hardened the mixture and made it more durable. Fletcher did not understand the chemistry, but he understood results. His chinking, with its wood backing and lime-enhanced clay-sand-hair mixture, proved remarkably durable through temperature swings and weather. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Summer 1836. The third major change was fireplace and chimney positioning. Instead of building against the outer wall, Fletcher positioned his fireplace in the interior, about 4 feet from the north wall. He built the firebox and hearth from carefully selected stones, flat ones for the firebox floor, rounded river stones for the upper structure. But the key feature was mass. Fletcher built the fireplace, structure much larger than strictly necessary for the firebox itself. The stone chimney was thick and wide, creating significant thermal mass inside the cabin. He extended stone benches out from each side of the fireplace, creating places to sit that also served as additional heat-storing mass. The entire structure probably weighed 4 to 5 tons of stone, all positioned in the interior of the cabin, where its stored heat would radiate into the living space. The design principle was straightforward: fire a hot blaze for an hour or two, heating all that stone. The stone absorbed the heat, then slowly released it over the next 8 to 10 hours. This meant Fletcher could let the fire die down to coals or even go out completely, and the cabin would stay warm from radiant heat of the stone mass. The chimney itself incorporated another feature. Fletcher built it with a slight bend about 5 feet up from the firebox. This created a trap for rising smoke and heat, forcing it to interact with more stone surface before exiting. The result was better heat extraction from smoke and less warm air escaping up the chimney. A stone damper near the top, which Fletcher could partially close when fire was low, further prevented heat loss while still allowing smoke to escape. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Late summer 1836. The window presented Fletcher with a specific challenge. He needed ventilation and light, but windows were obvious weak points in any thermal envelope. Standard cabins used oiled paper or rawhide stretched across openings. These materials provided minimal insulation and often tore or degraded within a season. Fletcher's solution involved multiple elements. First, he made the window small, only 10 inches by 12 inches, and placed it high on the south wall, 6 feet above the interior floor. The opening was cut through a single log, not at a joint between logs, eliminating a potential failure point. He created a shutter from thick planks reinforced with wooden cross braces. The shutter was hinged on the interior and could be secured with a wooden bar. But Fletcher added a feature that was unprecedented in frontier construction. He designed the shutter to create an air gap when closed. The shutter did not sit flush against the window opening. Instead, it mounted on blocks that held it 1 inch away from the wall surface. This created a dead air space between the oiled paper and the wooden shutter. The system worked as follows. During daylight hours, the shutter remained open, allowing light to enter through the translucent oiled paper. At dusk, Fletcher closed and barred the shutter. The air trapped between the paper and wood provided an additional insulation layer. This night shutter system reduced heat loss through the window by an estimated 60 to 70% compared to paper alone. The effect was measurable. On cold nights, frost formed on the exterior side of the oiled paper but did not penetrate through to the interior surface of the wooden shutter. Fletcher built similar shutters for a second small window on the east wall, creating a cross-ventilation option for summer while maintaining the ability to seal completely in winter. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Late summer through early fall 1836. The roof construction followed similar principles of thermal management. Standard cabin roofs were simple, poles laid across walls covered with bark or split wood shakes. They leaked during heavy rain and provided minimal insulation. Fletcher built a roof that would function year-round. He started with thick ridge poles spanning the width of the cabin. Carefully selected logs 8 inches in diameter, notched to sit securely on the top wall logs. He spaced them 18 inches apart, closer than standard construction. Across these he laid split planks, hewn flat on one side. The planks overlapped like shingles, each layer covering gaps in the layer below. He pegged each plank to the ridge poles using wooden pegs he had whittled during evening hours. Over the planks, he laid birch bark in multiple overlapping layers. Birch bark was waterproof and flexible. Over the bark, he spread a layer of clay mixed with sand, creating a seal that filled every potential leak point. Finally, over the entire roof, he laid sod, living grass and soil that would root and create a living roof. The multiple layers made the roof incredibly heavy, but the robust wall construction supported the weight easily. The result was a roof that was waterproof, fire-resistant from sparks, insulated against temperature extremes, and strong enough to support significant snow loads. The sod layer alone added approximately 6 inches of insulation above the living space. In summer, the living plants transpired water, creating an evaporative cooling effect. In winter, the root-bound soil provided thermal mass that moderated temperature swings. Construction of the new cabin took Fletcher most of summer 1836. Other trappers passing through the valley watched his progress with interest and skepticism. Building with double walls seemed like unnecessary work. The massive interior fireplace looked strange compared to standard end-wall placement. The sod roof drew particular comments. Most trappers thought it would leak or collapse. Fletcher ignored the skeptics and kept working. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory, October 1836. The first real test came in mid-October when an early cold snap hit the valley, dropping nighttime temperatures to 0 Fahrenheit. Fletcher lit his fireplace in the afternoon, building a hot fire that ran for about 2 hours. The stone mass heated up, radiating warmth throughout the cabin. By evening, when the fire had died down to coals, the interior temperature remained noticeably comfortable, warm enough that Fletcher did not need his heavy coat, something that had never been true in his old cabin. He closed the night shutters at dusk, sealing the windows against the cold. He let the fire go completely out around midnight and went to sleep. When he woke at dawn, his breath still formed mist, but the cabin was nowhere near as cold as it should have been. The stone fireplace was still warm to the touch. The walls showed no frost on the interior. The temperature had dropped certainly, but much more gradually than in his old structure. Fletcher relit the fire, and within 30 minutes the cabin was warm again. He recorded the experience in his ledger. October 19th. Night temperature estimated at 5 below. Interior remained above 20 degrees. No frost on bedding. Stone hearth held warmth through night. Shutters effective. The real test came in January when the deep cold settled in. Temperatures dropped to 30 below 0 Fahrenheit for several days running. Fletcher ran his fireplace routine, hot fire for a few hours each afternoon and evening, then let it die down overnight. The massive stone structure held warmth through the night. The double walls prevented cold from penetrating from the north and west. The tight chinking eliminated drafts. The raised floor kept ground cold from seeping up. The night shutters sealed the windows. Fletcher burned less than half the firewood he had used the previous winter, and the cabin stayed dramatically more comfortable. He could work on projects inside without gloves. He could sleep without piling on every blanket he owned. The difference was remarkable enough that other trappers who visited immediately wanted to know what he had done differently. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Winter 1836 through 1837. Fletcher kept careful records of his fuel consumption. His ledger showed the stark contrast. Winter 1834 to 1835. Old cabin. 24 cords of wood consumed. 73 days spent cutting and hauling. Interior temperature often below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost on interior walls common. Bedding damp from condensation. Winter 1836 to 1837. New cabin. 9 cords of wood consumed. 27 days spent cutting and hauling. Interior temperature maintained between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit on coldest days. No frost on interior walls. Bedding remained dry. The mathematics were straightforward. Fletcher had reduced his fuel consumption by 62.5% while improving comfort dramatically. The 46 days he saved by not cutting and hauling excess firewood translated directly into increased productivity. He spent that time working trap lines, hunting, maintaining equipment, and preparing hides, activities that generated income rather than consuming resources. The economic impact extended beyond time savings. Reduced firewood consumption meant less pressure on local forest resources. Areas where trappers clustered often showed heavy impact from everyone cutting firewood. Fletcher's cabin used less wood, reducing that pressure. Word spread through the Wind River Valley and beyond. Other trappers began incorporating Fletcher's techniques into their own cabins. Some used the double-wall construction. Others focused on repositioning their fireplaces to create interior thermal mass. Most started using his chinking recipe, which proved more durable than the standard clay and moss approach. The specific combination of techniques varied based on each person's needs, available materials, and building skills, but the underlying principles remained the same. By 1838, several cabins in the valley featured variations on Fletcher's design. A French-Canadian trapper named Remy built a hybrid structure with double walls only on the north side, saving work while still getting significant insulation benefits. A pair of brothers from Kentucky built their fireplace dead center in their cabin, creating a stone mass so large it stayed warm for over 24 hours after the fire went out. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. Spring 1837 through 1838. The summer benefits of Fletcher's design became apparent during the hot months of 1837. While other cabins turned into ovens, Fletcher's structure stayed noticeably cooler. The sod roof absorbed heat before it could penetrate. The thick walls with their trapped air layers prevented heat from conducting inward. The high ventilation created by opening the upper portions of the shutters allowed hot air to escape. The stone fireplace, no longer used for heating, actually helped cool the space. The massive stone stayed cool from winter months and slowly absorbed summer heat, preventing temperature spikes. Fletcher discovered he could enhance summer cooling by opening his door early in morning when outside air was coolest, letting that cool air flow in and displace warmer interior air. By mid-morning, he would close everything up, trapping the cool air inside. The thermal mass of walls and fireplace then kept the interior comfortable through the hot afternoon. In evening, he repeated the process, purging accumulated heat and bringing in cool night air. The passive climate control worked remarkably well for a design created with no formal engineering knowledge. Other innovations spread through the mountain communities during this period, though Fletcher did not claim credit for all of them. Some trappers started building with logs placed vertically rather than horizontally, creating fewer horizontal joints where water could collect. Others experimented with different roof designs, creating steeper pitches or adding ventilated attic spaces. The underground root cellar became another common feature, though Fletcher had not incorporated one in his original design. Dug into hillsides behind or beside cabins, these cellars maintained remarkably stable temperatures year-round, cool in summer for food storage, relatively warm in winter compared to outside. Some trappers even dug cellars directly beneath their cabins, accessed through trapdoors, creating additional insulation between living space and frozen ground. By the early 1840s, as the beaver trade collapsed and many trappers left the mountains, the knowledge of building climate-adapted cabins had spread throughout Rocky Mountain communities. Settlers arriving in the region often found trappers' cabins with these features already incorporated, and they adopted the techniques for their own construction. Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory, 1837 through 1860. Fletcher stayed in the Wind River Valley until 1843. The fur trade was dying, but he had come to love the mountains and the valley where he had learned his hard lessons about cabin building. He eventually married a Shoshone woman, Morning Crow's cousin, in 1841. They raised 3 children in that carefully built cabin. Fletcher made his living guiding settlers through mountain passes, using knowledge he had gained during his trapping years. The cabin itself stood for over 40 years. It survived countless winter storms, summer heat waves, and the wear of daily use. When Fletcher finally abandoned it in the 1860s to move closer to one of his grown children, the structure was still solid, logs intact, chinking holding firm, stone fireplace as sound as the day he had built it. Other settlers used it for years afterward, recognizing the quality of its construction. The building remained occupied intermittently until the early 1900s, when advancing age and lack of maintenance finally took their toll. The techniques Fletcher developed and shared were not revolutionary in the sense of being entirely new. Double wall construction, interior thermal mass, proper chinking, passive ventilation. All these methods existed in various forms throughout different building traditions. What Fletcher did was combine them specifically for the extreme conditions of high-altitude mountain living, adapting knowledge from Scandinavian log building through Bergstrom, indigenous construction methods through Morning Crow, and practical carpentry from his own training. The real innovation was recognizing that a cabin did not have to be just a box made of logs. It could be designed to work with natural heat flows, to store and release warmth strategically, to adapt to seasonal changes. This required understanding some basic principles of heat transfer, radiation, conduction, and convection, even if Fletcher never knew those formal terms. Wind River Valley, Wyoming, 21st century. The impact of these building techniques extended beyond individual comfort. Better insulated cabins required less firewood, which meant less time spent in dangerous, exhausting work of cutting and hauling logs. This gave trappers and settlers more time for other activities, tending livestock, improving their land, or simply resting. Reduced firewood use also meant less impact on local forests. Warmer, more comfortable cabins contributed to better health outcomes. Constant exposure to cold, as Fletcher experienced his first winter, stressed the body and increased vulnerability to respiratory illnesses. Cabins that maintained more stable, warmer temperatures reduced that stress. The social aspect of Fletcher's innovations deserves mention. By sharing his techniques freely with other trappers and settlers, he contributed to a tradition of mutual aid and knowledge exchange that characterized mountain communities. Building a cabin that worked properly meant the difference between surviving winter and freezing to death. People shared survival knowledge because everyone's life depended on it. Fletcher's willingness to explain his methods, to help others understand the principles rather than keeping them secret, reflected that communal approach to frontier living. Some of the trappers who learned from Fletcher went on to build cabins in other regions, spreading the techniques further. The cabin that started it all, that carefully built structure in the Wind River Valley with its double walls and massive stone fireplace, is long gone. But the knowledge it represented, the understanding of how to build structures that stay warm in winter and cool in summer without burning excessive fuel, survived. It moved through the trapper community, influenced settler construction, persisted in vernacular building traditions, and eventually reconnected with formal architectural and engineering principles. The night shutter system, that simple wooden panel hinged over an oiled paper window, reduced heat loss by an estimated 65%. One innovation, documented and measured, that changed how people survived in the harshest conditions.